and then the public hearing on the actual regulations.
So I will comment on 6.3, the very first line. It should be all areas that have been brought to finish grade.
Yep.
So do we have more comments on the regulations?
Not on the regulations.
And again, Adam did start by saying he hadn't received any comments from any of us. So I'm hoping that, I know I intend to come up with comments, and I'm hoping that other people do as well.
Yep, I will too. I do have a couple questions on the bylaw as well. On site, why is it 1 to 3 contiguous lots? Was there a reason for the 3?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Under the definitions, under site, there's a distinct portion of 1 to 3 contiguous lots. Did you pick 3 because we have some that are 3? Or?
No, I lifted that definition. I don't know why it's 1 to 3.
All right, because I know Keating's, for example, has a permit that encompasses many, many, many parcels. And
Actually, they don't. They have many permits that, we have one permit that encompasses 2 parcels. They have 1 parcel that has 4 permits.
Right.
And so they're kind of a mess with the permitting, and we keep trying to
figure out where,
we
couldn't figure out where the parcels
we figured it out, and we keep trying to pare down the numbers. And honestly, I think it's a distinct portion of 1 or more contiguous
I think
lots.
that makes more sense.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure out why it was 3. And back to the amount of area, on 140-3, applicability under
Yep.
2A. Matt, did you just say it was 1 or more acres of disturbance, or is it 2?
Yes.
Because this says 2.
One or more.
So why do we say 2 on this, on number A?
That's filling.
No, it says the disturbance,
2
all
is,
earth removal and earth filling operations.
okay, so, but 2 specifically says, the filling of land involves 1,000 cubic yards of material per
Okay.
calendar year, provided that it involves either the disturbance of 2 or more acres, the filling of land in excess of 18 inches. So that's specific to to fill, to earth fill.
Okay.
So we're adding that into, so currently we don't have any regulations for earth fill.
Okay,
So we're taking removal and we're stacking fill in with it to
Okay.
avoid what Pepperell's going through and what Uxbridge went through, where people can just bring dirt in and drop it wherever they kind of want.
okay. And why is earth removal or fill limited to no more than 3 contiguous lots? This is number I under exemptions, or number 1 under exemptions?
So that's not limited, it becomes exempt as long as it doesn't exceed 3 lots and meet the criteria down below. So 1, 2, and 3, and we discussed last time adding a number 4 about overfilling and excavating. So these are qualifiers to make the exemption.
I don't know why we would exempt somebody that has a total of 6 acres and they're removing more than 1,000 cubic yards.
We wouldn't.
Okay,
So it says, the following earth removal procedures are exempted from the requirement to obtain a permit under this article, provided that it's not more than 3 contiguous lots and not 6 acres.
okay. So up to 6 acres, they're okay?
As long as they meet the A through G on the next page. If they're one of A through G on the next page. Septic system, foundation, floodplain district, wetland, less than 1,000 cubic yards.
Okay, okay.
So it's a 2-tier thing. If you meet those 4 criteria and it's one of these 6
I
activities.
think this doesn't flow correctly then. I just think that we need to tie that better, because I didn't pick up on that. I thought
Okay,
that it
well,
was
what I
1
think,
through 3.
how about I flip it?
I think, yeah.
So it says that the following activities are exempt, provided they meet the following four conditions.
And.
Yep.
Because I think it looked to me like two different sections.
Well, and my question would be, if we're gonna allow them 1,000 cubic yards on a single lot, and they can be working on up to 3 lots.
No,
Then-
it would be a total of 1,000 over 3 lots.
Exactly. But the way it falls here, it seems as though if you're saying 1,000 cubic yards on a single lot, and then in the other exemption.
Oh, okay, so, yeah, so the single lot can just come out.
Yeah.
And now, again, I'll say it for however many times, 1,000 is just me throwing a number out there. 10 seems unreasonable to me. I mean, one dump truck if you told 2 dump trucks of dirt, you need an earth removal permit. That seems excessive.
What's 1,000 cubic yards?
10 dump
Is that
trucks.
That's 10 dump trucks?
It's
Give or
more
take.
than that.
Is it more than that?
Yeah.
I thought they were all 10,
If
oh,
it's a-
10 yards would be 100, duh.
Yeah,
So
20
it's,
yards is in a
So
triaxle,
how many dump
25
trucks
ton.
is that?
50.
50?
Yeah.
Well, then maybe we want to make it lower.
what's 50 tons?
50 dump trucks is 1,000
Oh,
cubic
Yeah,
yards.
because a triaxle's like,
Mm-hmm.
or 10-wheeler's
So maybe
20.
it should be less.
I mean, yeah, that's fine. I've seen everything from R10 to 2,000 as the range of
What is it now?
10 cubic yards.
So we're going from 10 to 1,000?
Mhm.
That to me is,
But in the scheme of things, you start looking at things like Title V, you have a lot more elevated septic systems, so you have a lot more houses with 2-car unders, which means you have a lot more fill being placed on sites in relation to just building in
but we can
general.
issue a waiver for that. I mean, maybe we do 500.
Well, I was gonna say, you can't issue a waiver for quantities, because that's not in the rules and regulations, that's in the
Yeah, but it's for
bylaw.
a septic system. How can we,
Well, the septic system is exempt.
right, so if they were doing it for a septic system, it's exempt anyway.
They don't even come to you.
Right.
And again, I threw it
I think 1,000.
I threw 1,000 out there because I felt like it was kind of middle of the road. I've
50
seen,
Trucks without a permit to me is excessive.
I've seen 500, I've seen 2,000. Everybody sort of has a different comfort zone with it as far as where people want it.
To me, going back to the residential situation, if I lived next to somebody that was pulling out 50 dump trucks of earth removal and was exempt from permitting, that would be problematic for me. I mean, 50 dump trucks going back and forth in a residential area with no permitting is pretty significant.
Would that same traffic be okay for a septic system?
Yeah, because it's a septic system, because I don't want effluent on my property. But if it's for
But-
earth removal and you're changing the contour of a property next to a residential area, you've removed the permitting requirement. So there's not the stormwater standards don't come into play. The topography, the groundwater doesn't come into play. So if somebody's pulling 1,000 cubic yards of fill out of the property next to me, that has the potential to severely affect the groundwater. And now there's no permitting authority looking at it. I have a huge problem with that. That's a lot of material, and to jump from 10 cubic yards to
So-
1,000 seems very excessive to me.
So just to quantify things a little bit, a 1-acre building lot, if somebody builds their new home and they want to put 6 inches of loam on their lawn, it's 740 yards. Figuring no compaction. And if you
But
figure
they're adding
15%,
material, but they're not pulling
well,
material
that would,
out.
this is adding material too. This is fill and removal.
But
either
and
way.
removal, which again has the ability to severely impact adjacent uses.
I just.
Yeah, I mean,
another
Phil has,
perspective
I
on things.
personally, I think Phil has more,
Both of them do.
they have different impacts.
Right, right.
I mean, stormwater is more impacted by fill because they're,
Because the topography changes.
yeah, they're
right.
creating contours that would spill water off.
Right. I think 1,000 cubic yards is too much. I think
Well, and
for
then
us
the
to go
other
from 10 to 1,000 is
piece
just
of that
way too much
puzzle
of a jump.
in my mind is I like to have regulations that just kind of flow and you don't have to grant a bunch of waivers. And I feel like at 1,000 yards, you're kind of at that threshold where they've got to do engineered plans, they've got to do all the soil testing, and we want them to follow the process, but at the same time, it's got to kind of make sense for everybody.
Yes, but we do have a trigger for the stormwater, because they have to, if they clear more than an acre.
Correct.
So how would you get rid of 1,000 yards without clearing an acre? You know, it's a pretty deep hole.
Well,
Which, if they dug a hole like that, and they were next to you.
Right, it would exempt them.
You'd be out of your
well, if
mind.
they had a 1 acre lot and they took 6 inches of material out, that's about 750 yards, so they cut it down a foot, and now they've triggered it.
Right.
So essentially, you could take an area that's just under an acre, a 40,000 square foot lot, lower it a foot, and you've triggered this, but you wouldn't have triggered stormwater because you're 42,000 square feet. So, I don't know. I'm just trying to strike a balance between the two so that we have a regulation that protects, groundwater and the town, but also is something that makes sense, so. And nowadays in construction, it is nothing to move 1,000 yards of material. I mean, with all the regulations and Title V and, all that type of stuff, I mean, it adds up quickly, so.
Well, I think to go from 10 to 1,000 is a huge jump, and I'd like to go kind of middle of the road and say maybe we go to 500. And, I mean, we can change it if we need to, but we are going to have a public hearing, so we can talk about it then too, but
We won't have a public hearing for
we
this.
won't have a public hearing on the bylaw?
No, the bylaw is a general bylaw. I mean, you can have a public hearing, you're not required to. I shouldn't say we won't, I should say you're not required to.
I don't see any reason why we shouldn't.
I was just going to say, why
It's like,
not?
And again, I'm informing you of the legal requirements. Zoning bylaws, you're mandated. General bylaws, you are not.
So they have, and B, when we talked about a little while ago, under 140-5B, so even if they exceed the thresholds, they continue to operate for 3 years? So it kind of supersedes A?
Yeah, but
What B is trying to get at.
there isn't going to be anybody who qualifies under B.
Why?
Because all of the permits now are, there isn't anybody operating who is operating on an exemption, and our exemptions are less numerous than what's in the new bylaw.
So in 140-5A, on the second line, it says bylaw and then says this article. Is this actually an article in the bylaw? Or should we
We
also?
can call it a bylaw. I think article is I'm using article as a reference to this specific bylaw. We can,
Okay.
it's just trying to clarify between the previous bylaw and this bylaw. If you want, we can take article and call it bylaw.
Just wanted your eyeballs on it, that's all. Confirm or deny?
And there's going to be a number, I think, of the 12 consecutive months, because I know there's numerous ones that are out there that haven't been active, and I know that was one of the questions that Mr. Rhodes had, is that there's so many that...
I think we've cleaned them all up.
Have you
Yeah.
removed them all?
I think there's only 2 people in town who currently hold earth removal permits.
Really?
And it's Powell and Keating, if I'm not
Those are the
mistaken.
only 2?
I believe so. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Powell may have closed out their last
Because there were a lot more.
operational permit,
ago.
or if they haven't, they're in the
Doesn't have one
process.
anymore?
Not that I recall seeing. Montori gave theirs up voluntarily,
Yeah.
and they're still using it, but they're only using it on site, so it's not earth removal. They're moving earth from one place to the other, and they take, I think, 5 yards a year to use in their greenhouses, was what the
The
discussion was.
roads audited all of them recently.
yeah, he did.
In the last year or two, right?
Yeah, it was about this time last year that he did an audit of them all, and
That's when Montori's was just like, forget it,
Yeah.
I don't want to do it anymore.
and Powell had one on Goodrich Street that I think they decided they didn't really use and didn't need any longer. And they have one open on the site that the board just recently approved for site plan. And it's going to be closed with this cycle as and the site plan being their closure plan. So I think Keating may be the only one who still is retaining. I may be incorrect on that, but that's what my recollection is.
And is there a period of time they need to act on these? Like if they're issued and they just decide not to act on them? Like
Well, if they don't do anything for 12 months, they would,
Okay. And if they discontinue use for any 12-month period,
Yeah.
it's considered inactive?
What about agriculture? You have a farmer that wants to dig a pond. He's looking for groundwater. How does that work?
where's he putting the dirt?
Staying on site.
I think that's an exempt activity.
What about like Pierce's? Didn't they just do a ton of, no pun intended, but a ton of earth moving?
Earth
Well, if
removal,
it was a ton, then they are exempt.
No, they did, I mean, there was Euclid's on the,
earth removal or placement of fill where the
Here.
operation occurs entirely within an individual parcel and where town-accepted public ways is not used for transportation of material. It's an exempt activity.
Okay, but what about the groundwater component where we?
Well, it's exempt, so none of this applies.
Okay,
So once it's exempt, it's not, it's kind of like agriculture to zoning.
okay.
It's an exempt activity, so you can reasonably regulate it, but you can't say you can't do it in an industrial district.
I just know that some, especially with the drought we had a few years ago, there have been some growers that have either dug new ponds or increased the size of their ponds to find water to
Yeah.
run their farm, so. So we're good.
I'm good. I'm gonna review these and come up with some comments, hopefully. Everybody content for now? Very good, and we can move on. So we passed over number 3 on our agenda was appointment to Open Space Ad Hoc Committee. We passed that over because you weren't here, and I don't know if you've got any input from the Open Space.
I've received the talent bank form and I'm ready to make a nomination.
Okay,
We didn't, that was, Paula's was the only one we received, right, Adam?
That's correct.
I know, yeah.
I'd nominate Paula Bertram to be on the Open Space Ad Hoc Committee as resident at large.
I believe so.
Second?
Second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any
Thank
opposed?
you.
You're not opposed, are you, Paul?
No, I'm not opposed.
Oh, I
Thank
didn't hear you say aye.
Well, I don't think I should vote. Should I recuse myself or should I vote?
No, you can vote.
Oh, okay, aye. Thank you.
You're not going to gain financially from it, are you?
Nope.
All right, so now we're on to master plan discussion on updating.
Well, I think the board indicated they wanted to look back at the 2002 master plan, among other documents, and identify goals and objectives that maybe carry forward and how those could be implemented, rather than continuing to state the same goals in new master plans. So you all were given a copy of the master plan at the last meeting. I'm not sure specifically how the board wants to go through this. There is one thing I do want to point out that has sort of been sitting in my head since I saw it, and it's that the visioning process and the planning goals in the 2002 master plan functionally date back to 1989. So we're looking at goals and recommendations that are based on goals that are at this point 30 years old. And I know 30 years ago I was pretty different than I am today. And I haven't been in Lunenburg 5 years, but I would venture to guess that Lunenburg is rather different than it was 30 years ago, both in its makeup and in where it's going and what's happened to it over that time. And I just wonder if implementing these goals would be better, or if the master plan would be better served by having a visioning process and focusing on implementation specifically of what comes out of a new master plan and putting significant effort into that. I did read through, and there are certain things that I saw in here that I think, yeah, we're still working on some of these, and some of them are things that I think people still bring up from time to time that either haven't been done or maybe were started and never made hay of for one reason or another. But that I want us to be cognizant that, there's a lot of talk recently in town about let's move forward. We can't change what's happened in the past. Let's do better ourselves. And there's an opportunity with the master plan to do that. But I also see the value in people wanting to look back and ensure that we haven't missed something. So I don't know how you want to go through and.
Well, I thought it was interesting that in the introduction, they say that 61 and 83, they had a planning consultant, established committees. So they had a planning consultant and they had committees.
And they did in 2002 as well.
Okay.
Thomas Consulting is on the second page.
So there was also Lunenburg Master Plan prepared by Anderson Nichols in 82, and then one in 61. Do we still have copies of those?
I haven't seen them. I can certainly search the office and see if they're in the inventory box somewhere.
Okay. Another use for that scanner?
We can do those with our regular scanner.
Yeah, maybe.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. So I agree with what you're saying, Adam. When I went through all of the plans. I went through the 2018 open space, the 2007 master plan, the 2002 master plan, the 2008 update, the 2010 update. And there's a couple things that, especially relative to the open space 2018, that when we develop this RFP, and I would like, and if the chairman feels makes sense to talk about the RFP a little bit, because having reviewed the RFPs of the other communities, I think that was really helpful for me to look at what it is that we're asking. But so, for example, in the 2018 open space plan, it talks about a review of vacant undesignated lands owned by the town. So personally, I would like a component of this master plan RFP to include that task.
As a goal?
Right, because I think that, we've done an open space plan. We know that this is something we need to do, so why wouldn't we incorporate that in the RFP when they're going to be looking at components of the entire town. So
So-
and I guess the question is, do we want to include that? It's not really a recommendation, it's a question. The 2018 open space also talks about identifying parcels that meet specific municipal needs. So are there those types of parcels?
Can I ask a clarifying
Sure,
question?
Sure.
Are you asking for those to be included in the RFP as a task
I
that the
don't know.
consultant would do, or to be included in the master plan so that they're codified with the remainder of the master plan?
I don't know. That's one of the questions. It was interesting to me to look at the RFPs because one of them specifically had Shrewsbury clearly identified specific tasks and deliverables, and I liked that because in going back and looking at all of our documents that have these tasks and deliverables, it makes sense to me when putting together this RFP that if we have an outstanding task that we as a board and various boards in the community agree that it makes sense to do, why would we not include it as a task?
And what I would say is, well, it would depend on funding and how much it would cost to do that item, and whether you wanted to roll it in with the master plan or try and fund it separately. From the goal perspective, I would recommend that the board, as part of their request from consultant, be that they take the 2018 open space plan and just convert it to a chapter of the master plan. Because and all those, and if the board wants to pare down the goals that are outlined in there or the objectives as part of that process, I think that's a reasonable expectation. But all of the lift is done for the open space portion of the master plan and for a significant portion of the cultural resources element.
But this goes back to my original reason for talking about master planning is basically you're taking the component that was put together by the open space and you're rolling it into the master plan. There's not a lot of work that needs to be done to do that. So I would question whether we even need to pay a consultant to do that because the work's all done from an open space perspective. But one of my questions was, when we look at the two pots of money, the $50,000 and then hopefully the second $50,000, does it make sense, because the article was worded such that it included an implementation component in addition to putting together the plan. So rather than paying a consultant to roll up the open space plan and put it in a master plan, which is really a matter of copying and pasting and putting it in a document, which I think we can do that in-house, is let's include a component of a task that's relative to open space that is reviewing vacant, undesignated lands owned by the town. So we have a list of the undesignated vacant lands that are owned by the town, and we identify any parcel that meets specific municipal needs. So now we've not only copied and pasted the open space plan, we've met two objectives of the open space, which is 2018.
And I think that makes sense. I think what you probably want to do is add that as an add alternate or something like that, where you get a price and then you get an additional price for that additional work, so that in the event that that work tips you over the amount of money you have set aside,
and I don't have a problem with a menu strategy, which is basically what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable way to do that.
And I don't have a problem with that, but I would have a problem with going out for including the open space component in a master plan, because we have an open space component that's up to date. We don't need a consultant to write our open space plan.
No, and I think that depending on the consultant you choose and how they choose to lay it out. I don't know if anybody looked at the Boxborough master plan website. That blew me away. I thought that was a brilliant idea because it's interactive and it's not this. No one wants to sit and flip through this. But you get all the same information and you get deliverable documents that are smaller and digestible and easy to handle. So converting the open space plan in a format like that, they would need to do some work, but they're not doing the work of creating the information. They're just putting it in a different format. If you want to stick with just the paper and, you know, look at doing it this way, then you're right. It's just cut and paste, and it's, you know, making sure it fits into the
Well,
format.
I guess that goes back to what do we want in this RFP? Are we looking for them to create a website and create a interactive site? Is that what we're asking for? Or are
Well,
we, and so, no, it's a question.
it is,
I think
and-
that's what we have to talk about.
And I
is-
think that it's not something I necessarily would have thought about until having seen it, or I would have said, oh, that seems kind of like it might be hinky or wasn't going to work right, and then you see it work, and you're like, oh, well, that was something different.
Would it make sense for us to consider interviewing consultants prior to the final issuance?
Oh yeah, that's part of the RFP process, and so
Well, what I'm saying is interview them and give ourselves the opportunity to tweak the RFP based on the discussions that we have with the potential consultant. Can we leave ourselves that ability?
I'm not a procurement expert, so I don't know. It certainly seems unorthodox, and without an RFP in hand, I don't know how many, or without having submitted a bid, I don't know how many of these consultants would come out and willingly, you know, interview.
Talk about it, yeah.
When you put an RFP out and someone responds and you call them and say, hey, the RFP review committee wants to interview you, they write that off as marketing, and, you know, they're taking a swing at potentially getting money. If they come out to get an interview before you've even written the RFP,
Yeah.
you know, they
When will we know about the grant money?
I think it's like September, but I'll have to check on that.
Did you say that one of these was Boxborough?
Foxborough was the one.
It was a website.
Okay.
I thought they're.
I just looked through twice. I
No,
didn't
we
see it.
didn't have the RFP, we only had the master plan itself, the website.
Oh,
So actually, I think we've already mingled 5 and 6 on
Yeah.
our agenda, so.
So there were other things in some of the other plans, in looking at the 2002 master plan. When we talk about economic development, we just reviewed the MRPC economic development component. And while I think the data in there needs to be updated, although I'm not sure if there is additional valid data, because are there new censuses since that report was done?
there's
Is
an
there-
American Community Survey,
Okay,
which won't have a lot of the business data, but might have some of the housing and other data. And it's a blended 5-year average of a sample population of the town. So it's not, and it does come with an accuracy factor. I did some numbers for Greg using ACS for the open space plan. And I think the 2 years that I used, 1 year had plus or minus 135 housing units, and one had plus or minus 230 or something like that. So they give you what the variance is. So it's not, and there's a variance to the actual census too, but they don't calculate that out. They do with the American Community Survey, because they collect the data over 5 years. They give you a blended average, and it's good for just having some sort of trending track between the decennial census. And they've only been doing it since the 2000, I think they started in 2007 or 2008, but they started rolling data out in I think 2012.
so see, to me, to rewrite the economic development component, I don't know that it makes a lot of sense. The task to me in that RFP should be to update the data contained in the MRPC economic development component, because I don't think we need to redo what we've done.
That was 2016?
And there were,
2014.
in the economic
2013,
development, one of the recommendations in the 2002 master plan, as well as the economic development component, were work on the website and to do a site finder add a site finder component. I'd like to spend the money on doing some of that work rather than rewriting what MRPC did.
Well, we did just redo the website.
No, I know, but there's no site finder information.
Correct. And site finder information is logistically difficult because someone has to maintain that database on a regular basis. And real estate market is constantly in flux and changing. And not only that, our commercial and industrial parcels are limited.
It doesn't have to be, but it doesn't have to be just a list of the parcels that are vacant. I understand what you're saying in that regard. That was the economic development component. But things like workforce, things like population that are readily available that you don't have to
So you're
sift
talking
through
about like a
pages and
community
pages.
snapshot more than a site
Exactly,
finder?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
See, that I think is a much more doable.
I know what you mean about
I'm
database
entirely
for-
resistant to site finder for a community like Lunenburg because I don't think the amount of maintenance that it requires has the payoff, but I think that community snapshot would have a much greater. It's easier to collect that data, and it's easier to maintain and post, and I think that they offer a bigger benefit.
But somebody compiling that, I think that would be a worthwhile expenditure of funding, rather than rewriting the economic development component. Unless we have real issues with the economic development component that MRPC put together, and if that's so, then we should relook at it. Personally, I don't. I think it was a good report. So I don't know. I don't know how
I think
everyone else feels about it.
I don't get a vote, but I think that over the past 5 years, since that was written, there's been a lot of talk about economic development, and I think it's been talk that has never really been settled. I don't know that there's a clear economic development model or goal that has been expressed by the powers that be. And I think that kind of leaves you in this weird space where you can do a lot of stuff, but every time you do something, there's the question of, well, is that really the economic development we want?
Well, okay, and I'm hearing you. So what if you included in your public outreach component, you included input on economic development?
And I think that's...
But regardless of what that input is going to be, they're still going to write an economic development chapter, which going to have all the data and all the information
Yes.
that MRPC did. So maybe, I guess that's what I'm getting to, is I think we've got to be very careful how we structure the RFP in what it is that we want the consultant that's selected to do. And I certainly would want feedback from the community on economic development. I think all of us probably have our own idea of what that means, and it may be 5 different opinions. But getting that input doesn't change the fact that the statistics and the data that MRPC put together is still relevant.
Correct.
Having someone
Yes.
rewrite that doesn't make sense to me.
No, and I agree with that, and I think it's important to just understand, and I think that's why the visioning is such an important part of what gets done is everything that comes after that, whether they're writing a new chapter, updating an element that we already have, is based on the lens of what that vision says is going to color the way that they make their recommendations. Because if we're looking at the vision from 1989, which the 2002 master plan essentially says that they did a visioning session. They're like, oh, we were perfect 13 years ago, so let's use that same thing. It's a completely different landscape now, and some of the recommendations that are in here might not have been made or might not be made with the people who may come in the room and sit in the room today. And I think that's the important thing. What I heard at the last time was the board really wants the residents, the citizens, the people to be involved as much as they can, and the direction to come from them. And I think that's important. And that's why I think it's important to say, oh, we've done this is great, but now we have a new community in some sense, and an old community built into that new community in some sense. And how do we marry the two and get to where everybody wants to be together?
I think Boxborough did a really good kickoff form, if you look at what they put together,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where do you live, where do you work, what's your favorite place in town, how do you get around, why did you move here, what keeps you here? Just general questions, I think, is the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where should development happen, what kind,
Yeah,
You know,
these
so-
are all the questions
that
that,
a visioning session would bring out.
So we've got on August 12th, an agenda item is going to be Economic Development Committee, but also looking at the April 2002 from 89, basically, the action plan
includes an economic development committee. Correct.
creation of an Economic Development Committee. So we've been talking about it for a lot longer than we think we have.
Oh, absolutely.
But I also think that kind of goes to Paula's point of, if you put 5 people in a room, you'll get 10 different answers of what economic development is. And, I mean, that committee can do anything from work with existing businesses to just ensure that their needs and concerns are met and represented by a municipal body, to go out and search for giant companies to come and move to town, and anything in between. I think.
But I think it's important the committee be created. I mean,
Yeah.
we've been talking about it for so many years. Let's just create the committee.
We should.
I don't
We're 2 weeks
understand-
early.
I don't understand why we just don't create the committee.
My thought on that is because the community has spoken and the powers that be didn't like the answer.
Well, that was originally under the Board of Selectmen, correct? I mean, they had it under
Yes,
their,
yeah.
on
And
their radar.
I mean, I think we're,
And you
Just
were gonna send,
recently,
you were gonna send out what that charge was.
yes.
And we didn't.
Did I
didn't
not
see
send,
that.
okay.
I didn't see that.
I'll make sure that goes out.
I guess my question is, are we going to develop an RFP before we know whether or not we get the grant? In my mind, I wouldn't finalize an RFP until I knew how much money I had to spend, because obviously the scope.
No, but, and that makes total
Unless
sense.
we
If it's
prioritize
September.
and say, okay, it's gonna be these 3 are top priority if we only have 50,000 to work with, and if we have more. But, I mean, I hate to keep coming back to the facilities conversation. I mean, we've been talking about the facilities in this town for,
It seems to be a theme about the things
Yeah.
that,
and in my mind, that's the thing that we, number 7's top priority as far as I'm concerned. If I had to pick one item to put $50,000 in, it'd be that. And I'm sure the TAPE and the Vertex and, now we get the next feasibility study. We've already spent $500,000 on brainstorming that. But in my mind, that's a top priority. And again, I've brought it up in the past, a lot of this stuff, we need the cooperation of other boards.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we reach out to them and try to build some consensus and get things headed in a positive direction before we get this all nailed down.
yeah, and again, I'll stump for creating a committee, creating a master plan committee that answers to the planning board, because while the planning board ultimately signs off and owns the master plan, there's, if you read through 2002, there's a ton of stuff in there that the planning board, can make recommendations on, but has no power to exercise or move forward. And having people be part of the creation and work with the consultants on the creation gives a sense of buy-in and gives a sense of, ownership on having done it. I mean, if you look at the charter, look at the people who sat on the charter review committee, and they were some of the staunchest advocates for the things that got put forward in the charter, and maybe wasn't something they had thought about before they sat in that meeting and listened to it and participated and said, oh, well, why aren't we doing this? And it streamlines some of it. I know the planning board's willing to take the show on the road and go visit other boards and committees and have that discussion, but having that constant contact of a member coming and going, I mean, we get it through open space, we got it through charter review, we get it through capital planning, we have voting members, and I think that you get better buy-in and you get a more robust understanding amongst the board when you have a member coming back and putting that stuff on the table for you. And, you know, you could include 2 members of the planning board and still not trip the quorum requirements, and, you know, the board is still significantly represented and has some handle on what's happening there. I think it's food for thought. I don't, you know, it can be done either way.
To Tanner's point, if we're going to wait until we know whether or not we have the grant, I think it makes sense to schedule, you know, to kind of put together an RFP with the thought process that we're going to have all the money, the $100,000, and then have a workshop to review the RFP. I mean, I don't know what everybody else thinks, but I think that hopefully it is September, and I think it does make sense to wait to see whether or not we get the grant.
In the past, what has it cost to write a chapter? Would we say
About
like 10?
$12,000 a chapter.
Yeah, I mean, that's the estimate we have from MRPC, so that was kind of what we used as a ballpark. You know, clearly you could spend much more than that.
I thought they were doing those for 6. No?
They're doing them for civil, then they've inflated their prices for me.
Okay.
I must have made John angry.
I thought that's what it cost us when we had that last one done.
Well, and I think a few of these chapters we can kind of roll in, like as Mrs. Bertram said, the open space element we have, the goals and policy statement, that's basically just
It's a collection of,
Right,
yeah.
and it really
you know,
comes from us.
And the implementation program, in my mind, that you really need to do in-house because you're the one that's going to implement it.
Well, some of that can be done in-house. One of the things I really liked about the Milton RFP is it needed to include the estimated cost and a timeline, and I think that would be really helpful, and I don't think that's something we can do.
No, and I think having the implementation plan rolled in makes sense, especially for items like cost and that kind of item. And there are a number of them that include costs.
Medfield had a very detailed one. Define the specific municipal actions necessary to achieve the objective. Prioritize implementation activities. Include a schedule and key dates. The implementation plan will be linked to the town's capital and/or operating budget and other related sources of funding and suitable for long-term strategic thinking. So I think we've got to, and that's, looking at all of these, they all had really strong requirements for the implementation plan, and that's something I feel strongly about, is because I think that's where we've been lacking, is we all the reports come up with a list of recommendations. It doesn't have the plan associated with what it's going to cost and what's going to be required to do it.
I think that's a valid point, because when I read the old master plan, a lot of the goals seem to be,
It's the same.
in my
They're the
opinion, are
same.
exactly.
They're still
the-
relevant.
Exactly, so,
Well, and I think that's also something that, from my perspective, is important, that as they're writing goals, that goals should be we want to have a great community, and the objectives are, how do we get there? You tell us something that we can actually do, not, we want to have a great community by having walkable streets. Okay, but how do you have walkable streets? You need to build a sidewalk here. And I think that's the important thing, is having recommendations where the rubber meets the road, where you can actually do something, not, the vision section, there's all these things labeled as policies, and they're not policies, they're goals. Where is it?
but
The goal is to protect natural resources.
But I look at them from a monetary standpoint, like protect natural resources, that costs money. We can't just do it,
Yeah.
To preserve the rural and residential characteristics of the town. We can, as a planning board, can do that through modifying the bylaw.
But I guess that's what I'm saying is,
Find out what we're able to accomplish and what we need to somewhat outsource too.
and I think that's the important thing about being specific about what the recommendations are. Protect the rural residential character. by creating a bylaw that does this, by, enforcing this regulation, by, the mandatory open space requirement is in here like 4 times. We could do that next week if we wanted to. I mean, we could rewrite the cluster bylaw to make cluster by right mandatory for anything that requires a subdivision, and building a conventional subdivision is a special permit. I mean, if that's the pleasure of the board, that's the way some of these, a lot of communities are going these days. That's the new approach to open space is, okay, you want to build a subdivision? You have to do it this way. And if you want to do it the conventional way, you need a special permit, and you have to prove to us why. There's ways to do it, and like you said, what can we do in-house and what can we outsource, and what are the timelines?
And the other thing is, when we talk about the RFP, and I think we need to talk about this more, is Milton included a couple things that aren't necessarily chapters of a master plan, but I think that they would really serve Lunenburg well. They required that the consultant include a services and facilities component, which is an updated inventory of the facilities that identified all the needs of the facilities. I mean, if we could obtain that while doing this RFP, that would be phenomenal for the community. They also required that they include a component, because Milton is a green community, they wanted a whole chapter on how to sustain that, sustainability as a green community. So I think we've got to really look at, when we craft this RFP, what we really want to include and what the end result is going to be. I personally don't want to just see it a rewriting of chapters. I want to see it as something that we can actually implement, and that we actually, in some cases, get data that's going to move the community forward.
And when it comes to goals, I think we need to establish short, medium, and long-term goals. Some of it we can start working on immediately. Some of it, like you said, we need to collect the data first, which is going to take time.
Can we somehow penalize ourselves for not doing it?
Well, I think that's a component that is like the elephant in the room for me. It's great to think about crafting an RFP and updating all of this, but we've got a master plan that we've done very little with. So in my mind, the priority isn't what the new document needs to say, it's doing what the existing document says. The services and facilities, I mean, we've done so many studies on facilities and gotten nowhere with things. So to do another study on facilities, in my mind, is...
Well, and I think it's also an opportunity for, if you do create a master plan committee, to have them transition to an implementation committee. And
this goes back to my whole thing at the last meeting, is I think we've got to include an implementation component in this plan.
correct, I mean, there needs to be an implementation plan, but if you have a body who's responsible for tracking or shepherding, championing that implementation, you have a greater opportunity for success.
I understand what you're saying, Adam, but if we have $100,000 available, there are some things that we can do with that $100,000 that I think makes sense, rather than just having someone rewrite a chapter.
I don't disagree with you at all, and I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying that however the master plan gets done, if the concern is implementation, and you could write the best implementation plan, but if there isn't someone championing it and standing up and saying, okay, this is where we're at, this board could look at everything that has planning board on it as a recommendation. You could say, all right, we're going to put out a schedule, and we're going to do, over the next 5 years, here's how we're going to tackle it, and this is what our goals are. Great. You guys could nail everything that you want to do, and there's still 70% of the plan that's just hanging out there waiting for someone else to implement something or to start something. So that's, I think, where having a body that's not the planning board trying to push someone else, is a collection of people who have skin in the game, looking at the implementation. And you don't need to meet regularly. You don't need to meet all the time. You could meet quarterly and say, where are we on this goal? We've talked about this. And it doesn't need to be another committee that someone goes to twice a month or once a month. It could be something that's really just we're following along and making sure that at least something's getting done here, and we can check off, we did that study, we looked into that, it isn't going to work for this reason, and keep track of that.
So I'm looking here, we have a community compact that we enacted in 2017. Is that gonna help us any on this?
I don't believe so.
I guess my immediate thought in the interim, if we take the time between now and when we find out if we got the grant or not, and identify if we each pick 2 things out of the existing plan that we feel should be implemented, we can kind of get the ball rolling. And in my mind, the master plan committee should be more charged with implementing what we've already got than necessarily updating, because the updating process we could take in 2 phases. Theoretically, we could say, okay, this year we're going to do these 2 chapters and get that process rolling. So I just would like to find a mechanism or influence the situation in a positive way where we can build some consensus and, address some of these issues that have been hanging around for a number of years. And it seems like we haven't been able to come up with a good plan for the town facilities that people can get behind and support at town meeting. So.
Community center was in here too.
Yeah, community
It was.
center concept, yep.
Well, and to be fair, some of these things have been being implemented, they've been being implemented for a decade.
Which is negating the implementation.
It's just paralysis by analysis.
That's exactly right. I think we have a lot of paralysis by analysis, and that's what I'd like to get away from.
I would argue that if you bring the same plan to town meeting 3 times in a row and get the same result, that's not analysis paralysis. That's how Einstein defines insanity.
Well,
doing the same
problem
thing,
is we keep
expecting different results.
We keep spending money on plans, but we're not looking at implementation. Tanner, I am in complete agreement with you. I don't want to spend another $100,000 that says the same things as the 2002 plan. I think that creating an economic development committee, looking at the facilities, actually doing something with our facilities is a better thing to do than to spend money on writing another chapter. It doesn't
Certainly.
make sense to me.
Yeah, certainly. If we took all the money that we spent on the Vertex, the TAPE, and now the new study to transition to TCP, we could have abated all the asbestos and TCP and.
There we go. That's to me, that was analysis paralysis. We keep
And-
looking at the same
And
thing.
whether you demo the building or repurpose it, you gotta get rid of the asbestos. And it would have been money well spent at that point.
I feel like I've been saying that for a long time as well.
So,
So this goes back to the crux of my issue is rather than just rewriting chapters, we need to identify if there are specific tasks to help us with the implementation of things that we can use those funds for. To me, that's money better spent. Does it negate the visioning and the public input? No. But it actually starts to move us forward rather than just another written document.
so we could form a master plan committee.
Sure. Formed an
We
open
can
space
form an
committee.
economic development committee.
Hey, that's next meeting.
Oh, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we
Well, no,
could,
3 of them are
but
in
we
here.
could.
All 3 of them are in here. They
I
were thought
know,
of in '89.
I know,
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. What was the composition of the,
7 members for, I'm sorry.
for the master plan committee?
Oh,
That's economic development.
there's an alternative funding committee suggested.
I don't think it has them listed in here.
Well, most of the RFPs we looked at, Medford, Milton, Shrewsbury, and Burlington all had them.
Did they identify the membership in terms of
They did,
where
and
the?
they did, and I can't tell you off the top of my head, but yes, they did. And I think most of them were 2 members of the planning board and then
Yeah, it's usually gonna
and
be 2
other
planning
land
board, a
use-
board of
yeah,
selectmen.
Conservation Commission.
Yeah. Some citizens at large. It wouldn't be uncommon to have like a 9-person master plan committee. I worked for a 9-person planning board once, so
Well, how many people were on the building reuse committee?
5,
No,
7.
7. At least-
I don't think there was ever any more than 5 in one place at one time, though.
Oh, well,
I mean, the charter was 9 and it,
Got unwieldy.
no, it actually worked very well. But I think a lot of that was because we had a very defined scope. And a lot of the measures that we wanted to change, we required a supermajority. So that
Yeah.
kind of structured things a little bit better. But in my mind, I think if we're going to form a committee, having, I would say, 2 people from the Board of Selectmen, or 2 members of the Select Board.
2 select board members, 2 planning board members,
Yeah.
finance committee,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so that's 5.
Conservation.
2 citizens at large.
I think we should look at the makeup of some of the other ones.
Yeah,
I can't
and
find them
again,
all.
I'm just kind of spitballing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important to have members at large.
so can we add that to the August 12th? Because we're already talking about an economic development committee and we're going to have community development in our brains? Does that sound good for everybody?
Yes. It's master plan.
Now, the $50,000 we have from town meeting
Yes.
can be,
Oh, yeah.
can be used for implementation, but the grant money could
Will be
only,
for writing.
only for writing.
Correct.
Okay. So we do have the ability, if we form the committee and they identify tasks that could be implemented, they could use that money theoretically, and we could take the grant money and apply it to writing.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Are we sufficiently discussed that for this round? So that was 5 and 6? Okay, everybody's good. We'll move on to 7, minutes approval. They were scanned to us.
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes from July 8th, 2019.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Abstain.
Committee reports. Capital Planning has not begun meeting. the Stormwater Task Force. At our last meeting, we interviewed, well, that was our last meeting, right?
Yep.
Yep, we interviewed two respondents to our RFP, and one seemed overwhelmingly in favor by the group. It seemed like one firm was specifically for this town, and the other firm was specifically for a town like Concord. The presentations and whatnot kind of represented that. So it was a unanimous decision to go with, this is not a problem talking about, right?
No, I mean, they've been notified.
Okay.
I don't think we've signed a contract, but
Okay,
it doesn't matter.
so we have not signed a contract yet, but we did choose one of the two, and we resubmitted more, we did resubmit more questions, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Because there seemed to have been somewhat of a disconnect between what we had written and what was responded to. And so that was the brunt of that meeting. And then the Agricultural Commission, we met last Thursday. Primary focus, the Hollis Hills Farm, Jim Lutanzi in Fitchburg had an electrical fire. So that's impacting his business. They manage a bunch of the agricultural fields in town. They do a lot of work with the locals. So it's very important to Lunenburg. We had some discussion about potentially fundraising similar to what we did when Cherry Hill had a problem. There was no resolution come to because we did not have the input from Jim yet. He's still in discussions. So that was there was no result from that. We did unanimously approve to move forward in finding out what's required to have a cookout either during or after the farmers market, with all local foods and everything available at the cookout be from within 30-40 miles. And everyone that I've spoken with since has that's a great idea. So that's it for the AgCom. Open Space Ad Hoc.
Open space, we almost met tonight. We didn't have a quorum. 3 of 7 or 3 of 6 that are actually on the committee, but now that Paul is there, hopefully we'll be able to have a full quorum next time. So they did submit the open space plan. We did get some feedback about 10 or 12 items that need to be tweaked a little bit.
All right, that's it. The land acquisition.
We have not met since our last meeting, but I can divulge that we do have a signed PNS, and we have submitted the grant application to go along with that to acquire 2 properties on Northfield Road, the Saliba properties.
So you have a signed PNS?
Yes.
So does that mean you're going to start meeting in open session?
Yes.
Nice. Okay.
And that was one of the criteria for us to submit the grant application, so.
Okay.
And I guess, I don't know if we want to ask the chair of that committee to come in and update us, we can formally. I don't know if he's planning on going to the Board of Selectmen or anyone like that, but,
We can ask.
okay.
I can reach out, you can reach out, however.
Is it Brandon?
Yeah,
It's up to the board if you'd like me to.
I'll do that.
okay.
I'll do that.
Just give us a more formal update than a committee report, but he's the chair, so I
Yeah, and
think
if
he should speak on behalf of the committee.
And if he's not available to come to a meeting, then we could get input from him through.
Send a letter.
Yeah, he could write a written report.
Sure. Good. Is that it on land acquisition?
Yep.
Green Community Task Force,
We have not, well, they have not met.
MRPC,
No report.
and MJTC.
I attempted to attend my first meeting, and had a very difficult time locating the building at first. And when I finally did, the door was locked, so I was unable to attend the meeting. But I did, and I was unable to obtain the minutes. They're not given out until a week before whenever the next meeting date is. So, and they're not having a meeting in August. But I did go over the minutes that were made available to me. May 8th, they discussed an amendment. I mean, it's hard for me to really give a good report here because I really don't have in-depth knowledge of what they're talking about. But they recommended an amendment to the FY 2019 to 2023 Transportation Improvement Program. And then June 12th, what seemed relevant was they did nominate Paula as their vice chair.
Yeah.
And they are working on a draft plan for local ADA public right-of-way transition plan development. And it appears that the goal is to have the draft plans for Lunenburg.
Are you sure that that's not last year's June?
I don't know. This is
I
what was
haven't-
sent to
I haven't
me.
been to a meeting, or I didn't go to a meeting in June, so that's last year's.
Well, no, they are working on the transition right-of-way plans for
Oh, so they
Lunenburg.
re-nominated me this June?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
well.
think so.
Well, let them know that I'm not there anymore.
I think they know that. But their goal is to have the draft plans for Lunenburg and 2 other towns by September 30th. So that's what I have for you.
Very good. I do have one thing of comment on the transportation is the MBTA recently, I think last month, upped their fares. So anybody that rides the MBTA, you probably already have found out, so I'm a little late. All right, so that's the end of our committee reports. Director's items.
So we've already talked about the open space ad hoc. That was more a placeholder in case we didn't get any applications.
There is gonna be another open.
Yeah, Rich Brockelman is gonna resign once they get the approval letter from the state, but that could be October, depending on how I know however quickly the committee turns around, the state can take a while to actually read it and respond. So there will be one coming up, but that could be a bit in the future. Solar energy systems, we talked about that a bit at the last meeting, about how the board wants to approach it. As far as I recall, the board was going to review the existing bylaw, make some comments, kind of indicate individual direction back to me, so that we can start looking at putting something together. Please, if I'm incorrect or if I'm representing it incorrectly, please let me know. But my understanding was at the end of the last discussion, Greg suggested everybody read the bylaw as it exists, and then come up with some comments so that there can be a more substantive discussion about it.
That was my recollection.
Yep.
So I don't know how much time you all want to do that. Because sometimes everybody works better with a deadline. So if we say we're going to discuss it at this meeting,
Do you want to put it on the 26th, Mr. Chairman?
We certainly could. It looks like it's open,
yeah, we're just going to have a hearing that night, but that shouldn't be too long, so.
a hearing.
That was kind of part of my discussion on the other part, is we need to have some sort of plan moving forward, I think, on how we address bylaws. Like, should we do, if we get them all on the same night, it's going to be forever. So maybe we could do like solar every other, and then, earth removal every other, or something like that. Or
So,
we need to make forward progress, but I don't want to overwhelm us
right.
at every meeting with all 3 or 4 things we're reviewing. But I guess that's probably up to you, Mr. Chair, since he's
So
set the agenda.
So we did we have to have public meetings, open hearings on,
Well, all of our meetings are public.
we have to have hearings
Yes,
on zoning, but not.
correct, but not for general. And honestly, I think that the solar rewrite is going to be more substantial and is probably a spring goal as opposed to earth removal, which is a fall goal, just to continue the transition so that the selectmen will have one last year of it and we're not into them doing 2 more years of it.
Do we want to continue to have multiple bylaw revisions on our agenda? Do we want to keep one and focus on that and finish it and move on to the next one?
My thought would be to focus on earth removal because I feel like that's already kinda
Yeah, no, I think that's
Draft.
priority. But I think once we get past a certain point where we get to a draft, then we can start maybe working on a first draft of solar before we're completely through it. I don't think there's any reason to wait until we're completely through.
No, and I think,
If all the legwork's done and we're just,
yeah, and I think on August 12th, or 26th rather, we could still have a discussion about what people's concerns about the existing bylaw or deficiencies are without getting into trying to draft something. It would at least give me a base so that when we've tucked earth removal away, I can start putting something together for you. Or when I feel like I'm tucked away in earth removal, I can pick away at it a little bit here and there and have something when you're ready to work on it. I feel like that's one that's been talked about for a long time. I feel like it has some significant hurdles in it. And, I think that there are opportunities for the board to address some of the things that have been brought up over the years. But I also think it's going to be, a 6-month discussion.
So is everybody good if we wrap up the earth removal and then we jump right into the solar?
Yeah.
I'm okay with providing some feedback on the solar bylaw for the 26th. I don't know, I think that's what Adam's asking for.
Sure, well, so the thing is we need to provide him input so that he can prepare something for us to review.
Right.
But I think on the 26th, we could have a discussion at the meeting about where people are with it. Because I think getting a consensus amongst the 5 members, even if it's not unanimous, gives a better direction. And I think once I start putting out, so earth removal stuff, I love to, because you have a draft bylaw. Getting that stuff ahead of the meeting gives me the opportunity to answer questions, have alternative language, or things like that. The discussion, I think, having it amongst you gives me an idea of where people are and what the point and counterpoint is, and gives you all the opportunity to convince each other one way or the other. And that's, I think, a good exercise in starting to get a bylaw together.
Yeah. So instead of 12 angry men, we're 5 agreeable people. All right. So, yeah, so if we want to put the, that's what it was, we wanted the earth removal on the 26th?
Earth removal, we said 12th.
Oh, master
No.
plan.
Master Plan Committee.
I have master plan on the 12th. Are we not doing earth removal on the 12th? Do you want to do it on the 26th?
Well, we've already had a 2-week lead time and none of us got back to him. So that's on us. We're all bad, naughty. But that would follow the every other meeting kind of thing. So I guess we should probably stay on track with that.
If that's what you'd like to do, that's fine.
Does anybody have
So when is that going to be? Earth removal?
the 12th?
Okay.
And then we can wrap that up hopefully on the 26th and then start on solar.
So on the 12th, we're going to formulate the Master Plan Committee, the Economic Development Committee, and do the earth removal.
And do Unitil's public hearing.
Yeah, that to me seems a little bit heavy, but
Well, we don't have to spend an hour on discussion. We can do our individual review and then give comments to Adam, and possibly, if given enough time, he can give us a revised,
Is that enough time for you, or would you rather have that on the 26th?
Well, it is.
I was thinking solar on the 26th, and that way, I mean, again, I'm just looking for people to see where they see it's
Just provide a
flawed, whether,
general
yeah,
overview,
basically,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you're okay with it, you're okay with it, but where there's flaws, where there's room for improvement,
Right.
at least that gives us a, I think.
Just
again, I
general
stated that-
discussion,
yeah,
not
I
a-
think- I don't think we
Yeah,
even need to have it as really an agenda item, just to keep it on the radar.
Well, you do have to have an.
Well, no,
if
I
you're-
do, but you know what I mean, I don't
Yeah.
think we have to go deep into the weeds at that meeting on it.
I mean, if
And again, I
I,
think there's been enough outcry throughout the solar projects that the bylaw needs to be looked at, so.
if I had stuff in 2 weeks by the 5th for earth removal, like if it was in my inbox on the morning of the 5th when I sat down, I would have plenty of time to get you a draft for Thursday, the 8th. And that would give you all 4 days to review it before the 12th. So we're in kind of like the sweet spot for this because we're in the 3 week between meetings area. So a week might be tight for you to turn around comments and me to turn around a bylaw in a 2 week span, but giving you, I think, if I have stuff the morning of the 5th, I don't see a problem with having revisions made to the earth removal for the 12th.
Sounds good to me.
That works.
Any nays? Any,
No, I can do that.
I mean, the only real complicating factor is when Rhonda and Greg and Tanner give me 3 different comments on the same section. So, you know, what I'll do in that instance is I'll make all the revisions that are singular, and then I'll put some thought bubbles or something off to the side, notes that say, this comment, this comment, this comment, how do you want to address that? Here's where I see the similarities.
And do you think you'll have a response from the Board of Health within that time frame too?
I can certainly try. I mean, Jim's usually pretty good about giving comment. I don't know what his vacation schedule or in general the Neshoba vacation schedule looks like and what his workload would be like in that time, but I'll give it the old college try.
all right, so then that kind of leaves off-street parking in the lurch. For now?
Yeah. I mean, I'll take comments on that if you guys want to give them to me.
Okay, you want to put it on for the 26th?
But we don't have to put it on. I mean, if you just want to give me comments and when we get back around to it, we get back around to it.
We can continue to let it linger on 12.
That's up to you guys.
Well, I think that we recently started having stuff linger so that we didn't drop off our radar. And I think I've started doing it with Agricultural Commission. It definitely helps us to keep it on our mind. So I guess that's a yes. All right, so we pretty much just filled in our meeting schedule. Any notices and communications that were not scanned to us?
Nope.
And then ongoing items is a rehash of everything, some of the other stuff we've spoken about. Any more comment on the schedule or the ongoing items? All right, is there any public comment? Is there any board comment?
Nope.
Do you have anything you'd like to say? No. Very good. I will take a motion then.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. We have Mylars to sign.